Hi everyone, it's Lori and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to review several images to show you how to use multiple masks to sculpt the light in your photo. I'll show you 3 images that I previously edited, and then I'm going to walk you through this gorgeous nature image from start to finish. Let's jump right in. So to get started with this image, I want to walk you through, and you'll notice over here on my mask tools that I have used 7 masks to edit this image. And this is a technique called light painting with masking, where you are applying multiple masks, different mask tools in a very soft way to bring out the details that you want. I just recently watched another photographer who edits doing multiple masks in an area to bring out those details, contrast, and really shape the light in an image. And I thought it was really fascinating and I wanted to try it myself. So I'm going to get started showing you this image. So I will show you the before. It was a very flat sky day, not much detail, not much contrast, kind of a throwaway image. But once I did some masking, 7 masks to be exact, I'm really happy with the way the image turned out. I think it leads your eye to all this detail in the skyscrapers and the sky above. So let me get started in showing you all of the masking that I did, and we will walk through and edit. So when I imported the image, I did have to do some just basic adjustments to the image, and then I began to start masking. So the first mask that I did was the sky. So I went in and did a sky mask, and then I made changes to dehaze the sky. So I wanted to bring out all of that sky detail. So you can see what a difference that makes with the dehaze. If I take it back, it's gone, and I bring out the sky there. I could also reduce the noise because there is a little bit of noise in the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that to reduce that noise while I'm in there. Okay, so that was the sky mask. Then I decided I wanted to do a radial gradient. And so I applied the gradient in the center, and then I inverted it. That way my mask was outside. That was just the quickest way to do it. So I've got this gradient here. I'll go ahead and click Show Overlay so you can see it. And from there, I reduced exposure. So I reduced exposure just 0.83 so that I could pretty much do like a vignette around this outside area of the image to really darken it. My vision with this is to lead your eye through the center. So I wanted to bring some darkness to the outside. So mask number 3 was using the brush. And what I did here is actually brush in this center area where the water is up to this tower. And this is where I began to make these light painting adjustments. So I added some contrast. I reduced the highlights so that it's not kind of too harsh and blown out. And I increased the exposure a little bit. So counterbalancing the highlights with the exposure gave me a really soft effect. I also reduced the amount of the mask, the things that I did to the mask. I reduced it. So instead of it being in the center, I took it down just a little bit. So this was my first mask using the brush where I enhanced the center of the image. So mask 4, I came in and I did another brush. And for this one, I just did the buildings kind of in this line of your middle of the screen sight. And so with these, I went in again and applied some contrast and a little bit of clarity and just a tiny bit of exposure. So I just popped those just a little bit to bring out those details. So that was mask 4. So now we go to mask 5. And with this mask, again, I'm using the brush. So I went in with the brush into similar areas. I wanted to continue to work on the water, wanted to brighten this boat a little bit and brighten this darker building. So with this mask, again, use the brush tool. And I increased the contrast. I reduced the highlights again because I didn't want to blow those out, and I gave it a little pop of exposure. Now this time I kept it at 100%, but just bringing in the detail here. So now I've worked on this water twice. So I've applied a mask twice to just really get the detail that I want in the water. So then mask number 6, I decided I wanted to do a linear gradient on this side of the image. And what I did was just reduce the exposure. So we'd already done the radial, but I felt like it needed to be darkened a little bit more, and I wanted to do it with that linear gradient. So I came in and applied that. And then mask 7, the last mask, I applied a linear gradient to this corner. Now, why did I choose a linear? I chose a linear because it's going to be darker, fading to light. Since it's a linear gradient, it will soften as it comes around the edges, and I felt like that's going to give a nice vignetting in these corners. So those are the masks that I applied to the image, and then I did make some color adjustments. So if we go back to the basic panel, I did increase the color orange, which was in this tree, some of the aqua, and some of the blue for the water. So it really wasn't too many masks. It was just a focus here in the water, some darkening around the edges, and a little bit of work on this building. I think I did add some clarity to the building, and of course working on the sky. So again, I'll show you before and after. I think if you look at the water, you can really see how it's not over processed, but it just really brought out that movement in the water, and then all this nice detail in the building. Okay, so let's look at another example, and I'll walk you through this edit as well. All right, so this edit has quite a bit also done to it. Let me create a snapshot so that I have the original at this point. Okay, so again, I'll show you the before of this image. This was a quick kind of snapshot as I was walking down the street. I just liked the structure and the lines of the city scene, but it was of course overcast, and there wasn't this much light down here, or my camera couldn't capture it. So to get started with this image, all the way back to the beginning, I of course did a straighten first, did some cropping to get it lined up. From here, I did go in and do some basic edits. So if we look at the basic panel, I opened up the shadows a whole lot, reduced the highlights, added some texture and clarity to just try to get the image kind of started. I then did go ahead and crop it some more, and then I began using the mask. So let's click on the mask to see what I did with this image. I'm going to go all the way up to the top. And now we can see, let me enlarge these. For this image, I did 6 masks. All right, so for the first mask, I went right here, mask 1, use the brush, and I started, we'll show the overlay. I started in these windows. You can barely see the mask. So I reduced the amount all the way down. I just wanted a little bit of light in these windows. You can see I increased the exposure and I opened up the shadows. So that was the first thing that I wanted to do with this particular mask. So then with mask 2, I wanted to enhance the building in the back. So I actually did an object mask, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So if you haven't used the new object mask, it's very, very handy. So basically if you go create new mask and we do objects, we can go and make a square around and it will find the building for us, which is just fantastic. So that's what I did on mask number 2. So I did an object, and from there I increased the contrast, increased some texture, clarity, and dehaze. So I wanted to just make this building pop. I wanted your eye to go through the frame to the building. So that was the second mask. For the third mask, I wanted to impact that walking area. And so I used the brush. And with the brush, I kept the amount the same. My flow and density isn't all the way up to 100%, so it's a little softer. And again, I increased contrast, exposure, and a little texture. So I'm trying to just make this area open up a little bit more. And that is where I had that mask. So mask 4, I wanted to impact this top area. So I did an object and I just selected this area. And then I came in and I added contrast and I darkened it. Also added some texture and clarity. Now I decided I had done too much right here. It got really dark. So later I'm going to come in with the eraser and actually erase that. So mask 5, I went back over this key area. So I felt like it wasn't enough. So I went over it some more and added some additional texture and clarity. And then for mask 6, I wanted to work on this bottom area again, because again, I'm doing this in soft phases. So I'm just taking my time and kind of layering the masking. So I did a radial gradient in this area, and this time I just gave it a little bump of exposure. So I could have gone back to the other mask, but what I'm trying to do is layer the effects so that they appear soft and natural versus, overdoing it one time. So it's pretty interesting, the concept of layering the mask to get that soft kind of natural look. And then mask number 7, I went back to the building. This was the mask that we just did. So I'm going to delete this one. Let's go to the mask and delete the mask. So this is where I've stopped with this image. I did go in and erase this part. I'm not sure why it's not coming up, but I can show you what I would do. Let's go here, and I'm going to subtract with the brush, and I'm just going to come over now, and I can remove it. There we go. So that's the easiest way. If you make a mistake on your mask, don't delete the mask. Just come in. I can even take my flow and density down on my brush, and I can even reduce it right here where it's just a little bit dark. See how I'm kind of just smudging that now? It's such the beauty of these new mask tools and how you can just really customize. You can go over it multiple times, just coming in and kind of softening that edge that I had created. Yeah, I like that much better. So at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with this image. I could add more lightness to these areas if I wanted, but I really wanted the scene to just pull your eye in and take you through that archway and that building. So again, this was the before and this was the after. So just thinking about light and masking and how to bring out details as you're editing. So another image that I worked on with light and light kind of painting was this image. This is the before. It's going to take a minute. And this is how I ended up finishing the image. I actually opened up this side of the image and kind of darkened over here. So you can see I did lots of masking with this image to get it where it needed to be. I started with a brush up in this corner to darken this area. Mask 2, let's get our overlay on. I worked on this little edge right here, but I ended up using the clone tool to fix that. Then I came down to this bottom area, and here I added some exposure and just kind of opened up those shadows. Then I did a radial gradient in this book area, and again, I reduced the highlights because it was really bright. So I wanted to get that toned down a little bit. Now I came over to this side of the image, and here I did the linear gradient, and I really worked to reduce the clarity, open up the exposure, the shadows, and the contrast. So this is where I started opening up this side of the image. Then I came over to the other side that was bright and actually darkened it. So I did the opposite effects on either side. I came back and added another linear gradient here and just wide open the shadows. Now I'll show you, turn off the overlay. This is where you kind of have an artistic decision. So I could leave it, a little darker, which is also fine. Or again, I could open it up. So you've kind of got a couple options there. I also had opened up the exposure. Now I kind of also like it like that. Gives a little moody light here. And this was more how the scene was shot. So you've got those options. But this was the second linear gradient that I had done to work on this area of the image, because remember, this part was really dark. I was shooting through a door and there were no lights on over there. So to balance my image, I needed to do a couple linear gradients to really work on this part of the image. And then mask number 8, I worked on this corner because it was just, it's got where the reflection from the windows coming in the door. and I just needed to reduce the exposure a little bit and reduce texture and clarity to soften it. There just were some lines there that I needed to work with. So 8 masks in total. It goes pretty quick when you're used to using the mask features, and just a fun way to think about light and how to impact light in your images. So I am going to pull up another image and walk you through a full edit from start to finish. This is, of course, a nature image that I took actually in Chicago, but out in one of the gardens. So my vision for this image, I'm working on a winter garden series, and my vision is to really give this a moody look and then really paint the light on these parts of the texture of the image that I want to bring out. So let's get started editing this one together. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is bring down the highlights, and I am going to open up the shadows just a little bit. And I'm going to do a tone curve in the midtones to just bring that down, because that's already going to help get the look that I'm wanting. I'm wanting this to be pretty moody and a little bit darker. So I think the next thing I'll do is go ahead and I'll start with my mask, and I'm going to select the background. And it did okay, but it did capture some of the leaves. So instead of that, I'm going to go ahead and delete this mask, and let's try selecting the subject and see what it does. It's probably not going to catch these parts. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Okay, so I'm going to delete that mask as well. Okay, so instead, I'm going to go ahead and do a radial gradient, and I'm going to do an oval one right here. And then I'm going to invert it. So you click invert at the top, and that is a little bit softer and better than what I wanted. Now I'm going to darken pretty much, most of the image. So we've got that a little bit darker. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is grab the brush tool, and I want my flow and density to be maybe about, in the 70% range. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to reduce the highlights in this bright area. So I'm just going to brush that on, and I may even bring down the exposure a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is just balance the light. There we go. All right, so at this point, I've darkened the background. I've gotten the mood kind of created. So that was before, and this is already after. So the next thing I want to do is start shaping the light where I want it to hit. So I'm going to grab the mask, and I'm going to do another brush. And this time I'm going to keep the feather high flow and density about where it is. And I want to increase the temperature, the exposure, and maybe play with some texture and clarity. So what I'm going to do is use the brush. I'm going to start with this one here. I'm just going to come along this area and maybe a little bit right on this line and down through here. And maybe a little bit on this corner. And so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and increase the exposure just a tiny bit. I am going to increase contrast. And I'm going to go ahead and add some texture and clarity. So very, very subtle in that area. Now I'm also going to add just a little bit here. You may wonder, I already, darkened this, but what I wanted to do was control the light myself. I didn't want that harsh light where it was. I wanted to really control where it's going. Okay, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and also take the brush and add some along this line. Really soft. And maybe around this edge. Okay, so that's my first go at it. Again, let's look at before and after, but let's also turn this mask on and off. So there's off and there's on. So while I'm doing it, you may not really notice it, but then after the effect, you can really see where that light's hitting. Now, I'd like to add a little bit more here, and I want to work with some more texture. So I'm going to go ahead and do another brush, and I'm going to keep my flow and density still really soft. And this time I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to come in right through this area, and I'm just going to kind of paint that on. Let's try bumping the exposure just a little bit. And then I'm also going to add some warmth, just a tiny bit. Now we can also reduce the amount of the intensity, which I like to use that slider a lot. I'm just going to kind of come around that edge. And now I want to add some texture here, maybe a little bit of clarity just to make that pop. Now, if you like the effect and you think it would work somewhere else, you can go ahead and continue working with your brush, or you can stop. And so I could come in and do just a little bit in that area, maybe a little bit more down there. And maybe pop just a little right through there. Yeah, so I can do before and after. And now let's turn off this mask so you can see before and after. So I'm just really painting that brightness in with the light. And then I would just, stand back and kind of look at it. Is there any part of this kind of story that I feel like needs some more strength? And I would like to see a little bit more texture here. So I'm going to grab the brush and I'm going to come down, and I'm just going to come in here, just really kind of make this one pop a little bit more. So adding some more texture, maybe a little clarity, a little sharpness, maybe even some saturation, and also maybe some contrast. I'm just really, really popping that one so it looks like it's coming off the page. So let's look at it now without that mask and before. It's very subtle. Now I can increase the amount of it, and let's see what that does. Yeah, it's very, very subtle, but I like it. So that's an example of using your mask to really paint the light, control the story, change the mood. Now you could do the opposite effect. So this image was kind of bright. I could also, let's say these leaves were really dark, I could use it to brighten them as well. So when you think about maybe an image that is dark to begin with, like these, I could come in and paint some light to brighten. So it doesn't have to be the dark side like I did. You can also add light to brighten. So think about doing it with the mask and really working slowly, gently, making adjustments as you go, and just continue layering your mask to get the effect that you want overall to your image. Can't wait to see what you create. Be sure to tag me on Instagram if you use the tips in this video, and please subscribe. I appreciate any comments, and thanks for watching.